Welcome to Calf Academy, your source for calf care education.
This presentation is entitled Cold Stress and Heat Stress in Calves. By way of overview of this module, we will discuss the biology of cold stress and its physiological impact. We'll discuss the feeding and management strategies to reduce cold stress. We'll discuss the biology of heat stress and its physiological impact and the signs of heat stress. And then we'll talk about management strategies to reduce heat stress, and then dehydration, its implications, and ways to detect it. The biology of cold stress. Maintaining body temperature requires energy. Cold stress increases the maintenance energy requirement. Calves have a limited ability to regulate their body temperature. They have an immature metabolism. They're pre-ruminant. Rumination creates heat, and therefore the adult animal is more able to create heat, to generate heat than the young calf is. The calf is born and has a lack of appreciable fat stores. Fat is broken down in a negative energy balance to generate energy. And they have a lack of insulating fat covering. Lastly, most calves do not consume enough calories to generate enough heat, and therefore are in a negative energy balance. The age of the calf affects its lower critical temperature. The lower critical temperature is the temperature at which it must start expending energy to stay warm. If you look at the age versus the lower critical temperature, a newborn calf has a lower critical temperature of 50 degrees Fahrenheit. That means below 50 degrees Fahrenheit, a newborn calf is having to utilize energy to maintain its body temperature. A month-old calf, its lower critical temperature is reduced to 32 degrees Fahrenheit. And if you look at a dry dairy cow that ruminates, its lower critical temperature is 8 degrees Fahrenheit. Calves experience cold stress at moderate temperature. Lower critical temperature decreases with age, greater energy intake, and ruminal development. The amount and type of bedding has a direct effect on the impact of cold stress. In a study, Alfonso Lago looked at three variables. He looked at airborne bacteria counts. Those are the counts of pathogens, the airborne pathogens taken at the alley and in the calf pen. He looked at the pen setup, the number and location of barriers or partitions that reduce drafts. And then he looked at the nesting score. The nesting score was either a nesting score of 1, where the calf can stand on top of the bedding, where the bedding is packed and the calf can stand on top with its legs exposed. A nesting score of 2 indicated that there was some nesting, but part of the leg was exposed, perhaps from the hock up. And then a nesting score of 3, where it's deep nesting, where the legs are not visible and the calf can lay down and get out of the draft. The results of this study are depicted in this slide. The y-axis is the prevalence of respiratory disease. That is the percent of calves that succumb to respiratory disease. The x-axis depicts the different levels of airborne bacteria. Then if you look at the different lines on this graph, the first line is the nesting score. There was a nesting score of 1. If you remember, that's where the bedding was packed and the calf stood on top of it with its legs exposed, and the absence of a solid barrier. Next was a nesting score of 2, and there was no solid barrier. Lastly, there were the 3 levels of nesting score and the presence of a solid barrier. If you look at the nesting score and whether the presence or absence of the solid barrier, if you look at a nesting score of 1, almost no nesting and no solid barrier, and then you look at the airborne bacteria counts across the x-axis, there can be a very low level of airborne bacteria and a fairly high percentage of calves succumbing to respiratory disease. Then when you get into higher levels of airborne bacteria, you can see that most of the calves, or a high percentage of the calves, were diagnosed with respiratory disease. The other extreme is if you have a nesting score of 3 and you have a solid barrier, calves can be exposed to a very high level of respiratory disease in the air and still not succumb to the respiratory disease. This is saying that the bedding and the opportunity for the calves to get out of the drafts has a dramatic impact on their susceptibility to respiratory disease. Calves consuming a 20/20 milk replacer at different feeding rates, the average daily gain or the energy available for gain with a 100-pound body weight, and the maintenance energy requirement depicted in megacals per day. So at 60 degrees Fahrenheit, a calf consuming 0.82 pounds of 2020 milk replacer provides the calf with its maintenance energy requirement. In other words, it will gain 0 pounds per head per day. Its metabolizable energy required is 1.81 megacals per day. A calf consuming 1.5 pounds at 60 degrees Fahrenheit will have energy available for 1.32 pound per head per day average daily gain, or 3.67 megacals of energy available per head per day. If the temperature drops to 10 degrees Fahrenheit, the calf needs to consume 1.52 pounds of 2020 milk replacer per head per day just to have its maintenance for energy requirement met. In order to gain 1.32 pounds per head per day, like the first calf did, like it did at 60 degrees at 1.5 pounds per head per day, the calf has to consume 2.35 pounds of 2020 milk replacer per day just to gain the same 1.32 pounds of body weight. This is saying that when the temperature drops from 60 degrees Fahrenheit to 10 degrees Fahrenheit, there's an 80% increase in the metabolizable energy necessary for maintenance. Cold stress has multiple physiological impacts on the calf. One is it depletes the body fat reserves. Remember, young calves don't have much body fat anyway. And if they're in a negative energy balance, they will break down that fat and utilize it to stay alive or to maintain its body temperature. The calf can literally starve to death because if it uses all its fat reserves, it has no energy left for weight gain. The second impact is that it has depressed immune function. Remember, an immune response is an energy-dependent reaction. If the energy is not available to generate an immune response, the calf won't be able to fight disease, nor will it respond to vaccines. Lastly, decreased growth and performance. Growth and performance is the last place energy goes. It goes to maintain brain function and maintain body weight, or maintain body temperature before it goes to growth. So if they're in a negative energy balance, they're not going to grow. Key management practices that will reduce the impact of cold stress. One is calf jackets on newborn calves. As we stated earlier, the calf is born without fat covering. This can be adjusted for by providing the calf with a fat covering or an insulating covering with a calf jacket. Next, deep-bedded straw is more effective than wood chips or sand. Deep-bedded straw, as we looked at previously, is a way for the calf to get down out of the drafts and insulate itself from the cold. Key management practices that will reduce the impact of cold stress. One is air quality. As barns get closed up, airborne pathogens increase the incidence of respiratory disease and scours. These can be minimized by a ventilation system which changes the air at the calf level several times per hour without creating a draft. Another management practice that needs to be adhered to is water availability. Warm water should be offered within 30 minutes of milk feeding twice a day. Calves will drink water after they drink their milk. After they go back and lay down in the hutch or lay down in their pen, they won't necessarily come back to drink water. But if they've just drank their milk within a few minutes or within 30 minutes, they will drink water at that time. Also, in the winter, fresh, non-frozen water needs to be available for the calves, so they have the opportunity several times a day to consume fresh water. There are some nutritional strategies which will also help us reduce the impact of cold stress. The objective of any feeding program during cold is to exceed the maintenance energy requirements and maintain desired growth rates regardless of temperature. You got to focus on young calves less than 3 weeks old, as you remember they have the higher critical temperatures. Several nutritional strategy options are available. One is you can increase the amount of powder or the amount of dry matter intake per calf per day. You can increase this by increasing the amount of powder dissolved in 2 quarts of water. Keep the volume the same, but increase the solids level. You can utilize a fat supplement, which increases the fat value or the energy value of your current milk replacer program or whole milk program. You can increase the liquid feeding rate. If you're on a 2-quart feeding rate and you increase to a 2.5 to 3 quarts per feeding, that'll increase the dry matter intake and the energy available for each calf. Lastly, is you can add a third feeding. If you feed 2 quarts twice a day is your normal feeding program, in the winter you can go to 2 quarts feeding 3 times a day. It has also been shown that birth weights can have an effect on energy requirements. Take, for instance, if you're feeding a 2020 calf milk replacer at a pound per calf per day, a pound of dry matter intake per calf per day, looking at their birth weight, if they're born at 75 pounds, 90 pounds, or 100 pounds, at 65 degrees Fahrenheit, a calf born at 75 pounds will have an energy allowable for gain at 0.71 pounds per head per day. The temperature of 45 degrees, that same calf born at 75 pounds will have a 0.39 pounds per head per day energy allowed for gain. Now let's look at a calf that's born that weighs 100 pounds at birth. At 65 degrees, it'll have a 0.39 energy of consuming the same 2020 1 pound of 2020 milk replacer will have a 0.39 pounds per head per day energy allowable gain. However, at 45 degrees Fahrenheit, it'll be in a weight loss situation because the 100-pound calf has a much higher maintenance energy requirement than a calf that's born at 75 pounds. Some things to consider when determining a cold weather strategy for an operation is, does the farm use bottles or pails? Remember, bottles limit how much liquid can be fed. There's 2-quart bottles available, which are the most common. There's also 3-quart bottles available now, with higher feeding rate programs being more common now. What bottles they have available, or whether they feed out of bottles or bucket, will be a factor in what strategy is recommended. There are several options. We can increase the energy density, we can feed more volume, we can feed more times per day, or we can do all three of those. The first strategy we talked about was increased solids percentage. At standard mixing rates, 8 ounces dissolved in 2 quarts of water fed twice a day is 10.7% solids. If you feed 10 ounces dissolved in 2 quarts of water fed twice a day, that's 13% solids. 12 ounces dissolved in 2 quarts of water fed twice a day is 15.2% solids. And 14 ounces dissolved in 2 quarts of water fed twice a day is 17.3% solids. 18% solids is the maximum solids recommended. The ability to increase intake just by increasing solids is limited with this approach. If you mix 14 ounces in 2 quarts of water, that's kind of the upper limit for solids in a 2-quart bottle. And when you're feeding higher solids, it's important to keep in mind that you need plenty of fresh water available continuously. If you look at a 100-pound calf consuming a 2020 milk replacer at 70 degrees, if that calf consumes 1.25 pounds of dry matter, which is a 10-ounce mixing rate, the protein available for gain is 0.72 pounds per day, and the energy available for gain is 0.72 pounds per day. The energy balance is a plus 0.85 megacals per day. If they consume 1.5 pounds of the same 2020, they have protein available for gain 0.91, energy available for gain of 1.07 pounds per day, and they have an energy balance of positive 1.37 megacals per day. At 32 degrees, at 1.25 pounds of intake of a 2020 milk replacer, you can see the calf's in a negative energy balance. At 1.5 pounds of intake, their energy available for gain is reduced to 0.41 pounds per day. And then at 10 degrees Fahrenheit, they're at a weight loss or a negative energy balance at both the 1.25 pounds per head per day and the 1.5 pounds per head per day intake. Another strategy is to use K-Cal. K-Cal is a 760 fat supplement, spray-dried animal fat supplement. K-Cal is 7% crude protein and 60% fat, and it's fed by adding it to milk replacer at the rate of 2 to 4 ounces per calf per day. If K-Cal is added to a 2020 milk replacer at 2 ounces per calf per day, it changes that 2020 milk replacer to a 2024 or 24% fat. If you add 4 ounces per calf per day, you're feeding a 2027, which would be 27% fat milk replacer. So it increases the energy value of the milk replacer that you're feeding. When feeding a fat supplement like K-Cal, there's some areas of caution when it comes to percent solids. If you look at the influence of K-Cal on milk replacer solid percentage, if you're mixing 10 ounces of milk replacer and 2 quarts of water, and you add no K-Cal to that, that's 13% solids. If you add 1 ounce of K-Cal to that mixture, and that'd be 2 ounces per head per day, you're increasing the solids of that to 14.2%. And if you add 2 ounces of K-Cal per feeding, or 4 ounces per head per day, you're increasing the percent solids to 15.2%. At the 12 ounce per 2 quart mixing rate, which is a 15.2% solids, you add 1 ounce of kcal to that, and you're up to 16.3% solids. If you add 2 ounces of kcal to that, or to 4 ounce per head per day, you're up to 17.3% solids, which is problematic. The take-home message from this is that you increase milk replacer powder mixing rate or you add a fat supplement. Don't do both, because we're getting to problematic levels of solids if we do both. Generally, greater than 16% solids is not suggested. However, if supplemental fat is used, it has a smaller effect on osmolality than just increasing the solids percentage with milk replacer does. At 32 degrees Fahrenheit, a 20-20 with 2 ounces per head per day of fat, or 1 ounce per feeding, feeding the 20-20 at 1.25 pounds of dry matter per head per day. The protein available for gain at 32 degrees Fahrenheit is 0.75. The energy available for gain is 0.35 pounds per head per day. At 32 degrees Fahrenheit, if we take the 20-20 and add 4 ounces per head per day and feed it at the 1.25 pounds per head per day dry matter feeding rate, the protein available for gain is 0.78 pounds per head per day, and the energy available for gain is 0.68 pounds per head per day. However, if the temperature drops to 10 degrees Fahrenheit, feeding 2 ounces of kcal to 1.25 pounds per head per day of 20-20 milk replacer, the protein available for gain is 0.78, but look at the energy available for gain. We're in a weight loss situation or a negative energy balance. So therefore, at 10 degrees Fahrenheit, feeding the 4 ounces per head per day or the 2 ounces per feeding of kcal added to the 1.25 pounds of 20-20 milk replacer keeps us in a positive energy balance. The take-home message from this slide is that 2 ounces of kcal per calf per day is not enough energy. 4 ounces of kcal per calf per day is recommended during times of moderate cold. This third strategy is to look at increased liquid feeding rate. If we look at the effect of liquid feeding rate on dry matter intake in pounds per head per day, looking across a couple different mixing rates. So we look at 2 quarts fed twice a day, mixed at the 10 ounce mixing rate, which is 1.25 pounds of dry matter per head per day, or at the 12 ounce mixing rate, which is 1.5 pounds of dry matter per head per day. If we increase the liquid intake to 2.5 pounds fed twice a day, at the 10 ounce mixing rate, we're feeding 1.56 pounds of dry matter per head per day. At the 12 ounce feeding rate, we're feeding 1.875 pounds of dry matter per head per day. If we feed 3 quarts twice a day, at the 10 ounce mixing rate, we're feeding 1.875 pounds of dry matter per head per day. And at the 12 ounce mixing rate, we're feeding 2.25 pounds of dry matter per head per day. If you look at the protein available for gain and the energy available for gain at different temperatures for those increases in liquid feeding rate, at the 1.25 pounds of dry matter intake per head per day, at 70 degrees of a 20-20, at 70 degrees Fahrenheit, you can see, and this is a 100-pound calf, you can see that the protein available for gain and the energy available for gain are the same at 0.72 pounds per head per day. As the temperature drops to 32 degrees Fahrenheit, that 1.25 pounds of dry matter intake is not enough to maintain a positive energy balance. However, the 1.56 pounds of dry matter intake per head per day is. We still have a 0.51 average daily energy available for gain, pounds per day energy available for gain. Then at 10 degrees Fahrenheit, we need to have them eating the 1.875 pounds of dry matter intake to be in a positive energy balance. Strategy number 4 is to add a third feeding of milk replacer. This is the ideal approach. It spreads out the feedings, and a warm feeding at noon on a cold day is beneficial to the calves in a lot of ways. It reduces the risk of refusals. The calves are usually hungry because they've been utilizing their energy at a higher rate. There's some implementation issues with this strategy. One is labor. It takes more labor to feed the calves 3 times per day. That's obvious. And it's somewhat inconvenient. But an ideal feeding strategy is to feed an extra 1 to 2 quarts at noon and keep the solid strategy the same. Just add an extra feeding of 1 to 2 quarts at noon. So, in summarizing the different feeding programs, there needs to be kind of an all-winter approach, which would be add K-Cal at 4 ounces per calf per day, or mix your milk replacer at a higher solids level at the 12 ounces and 2 quarts mixing rate. And then when daytime temperatures go below 20 degrees, you feed the extra 1 to 2 quarts daily, either in an extra feeding or by more volume per feeding. Another strategy is for all winter, mix milk replacer at 10 ounces per 2 quarts and feed 5 quarts daily. And then when temperatures go below 20 degrees Fahrenheit, feed an extra 1 to 2 quarts per head per day. Either way, the goal is to increase the dry matter intake of the calf without exceeding 16% solid. Conclusions of cold weather feeding strategies. Calves need more calories during cold weather for maintenance, growth, and immune function. We need to focus on housing, and bedding will decrease the maintenance energy requirements and reduce the impact of respiratory disease during cold weather. Increasing liquid feed intake and fat supplementation are effective strategies. The goal is to get the calf to eat more megacals of energy per day. Good calf starter management is key, and water intake is paramount to optimize starter intake. Really, if we focus on the youngest calves, the calves less than 3 weeks of age, we will resolve a great deal of our cold weather problems, because as the calves get older, they're less impacted by the cold weather. Now let's look at heat stress in calves. When looking at the effects of heat stress, we need to look at things that affect the immune system. The immune system can be affected by stress. The birthing process can be a time of stress, which affects immune function. The environment, predominantly heat, and then changes in the environment, drastic temperature changes, sudden cold fronts, wind. Another factor that can affect the immune system is poor nutrition. We already stated that an immune response is an energy-dependent reaction. Therefore, energy in the diet has a direct impact on immune function. Protein, vitamins, and trace minerals all have an effect on immune function. And then, pathogen load can overwhelm the immune system and cause failure. And another factor that needs to be considered when looking at immune system failure is the calf's colostrum status. Heat stress can have a physiological impact on the calf. In response to heat stress, physiological respiration rates of increase, panting, is the calf's body energy requirement can rapidly dehydrate, similar to the effect of cold stress. And then in hot weather, calves burn more energy, keeping themselves cool. Calf growth and health can be negatively affected if heat stress is not managed. The signs of heat stress are increased respiratory rates, panting, open mouth breathing, decreased appetite, and reluctance to move. Heat stress management strategies, you need to pay particular attention to housing. Translucent housing has some advantages for disease control and things like that. However, a study conducted in Pennsylvania showed that the daytime air temperatures inside translucent hutches were 3.6 degrees to 5.4 degrees Fahrenheit higher than the outside temperature. The study noted higher calf body temperatures, respiration rates, water intake, and lower feed intake in translucent hutches when compared to opaque hutches. During warmer temperatures, it's important to pay attention to management factors such as airflow. Naturally ventilated buildings should have all the vents open, including the ridge eave vents as well as the sidewall curtains. Hutches need vents and doors open, and the back end may be elevated using wooden or concrete blocks to allow airflow. And hutches should have enough space between them to provide for adequate airflow between the hutches. Positive pressure tubes are a way to bring outside air into calf barns. The goal of a positive pressure tube is to provide airflow or air exchange at the calf level and reduce airborne bacteria. As with cold stress, bedding is important during times of heat stress. However, considerations are different. Ideal bedding for calves during hot weather is somewhat debatable. Inorganic sources such as sand or wood shavings offer advantages over organic sources such as straw when it comes to fly populations and retention of moisture. Sand and shavings do not insulate the calf as much and reduce fly population and are better from a fly population perspective. Another important management consideration during times of heat stress is water. Calves must have free choice water. Calves exposed to heat stress can consume 3 to 6 gallons of water per head per day. A third water feeding may be necessary to prevent dehydration and assure proper health. So if you're feeding milk twice a day or milk replacer twice a day, it may be advantageous to offer a third feeding of just water in the middle of the day or during the heat of the day. An additional management consideration during times of heat stress is calf starter. The freshness of the calf starter is very important. It needs to be closely monitored during times of hot weather when the calf starter is susceptible to mold growth, fly infestation, or excessive fines. If possible, there should be a solid partition or space between the water and the grain bucket to prevent carryover of water into the grain bucket, lowering its quality very quickly. During times of warmer temperature, stressful events such as moving, grouping, vaccinating, dehorning, or other management factors should be done in the early morning. The animal body temperature lags behind the ambient temperature by 4 to 6 hours, so morning is the best time to conduct potentially stressful activities. When evaluating dehydration or determining whether or not calves are dehydrated, the first place you look are the eyes. The eyes should not be sunken into their sockets. They should be bright and fully placed in the calf's head. Eyes become sunken or retracted when the calf approaches 4% dehydration. Another way to evaluate dehydration is the skin test. It's a pinch test, it's also called. The process is to grab a fold of the skin on the calf's neck and squeeze it together and pull it away from the neck. Once this pinch of skin is let go, it should be back to normal skin in 2 seconds or less. If the skin stays in the pinched or tended position for more than 2 seconds, the calf is at least 4% dehydration and needs electrolyte therapy as soon as possible. Another way to detect dehydration is the calf's behavior. By combining the above two tests, the skin pinch and the eye test, with behavior, it is possible to get a good assessment of whether the calf is dehydrated or not. If a calf is sluggish, slow to eat, or respond to feeding time, it may be in the early stages of dehydration. This concludes the heat stress and cold stress module.
Thank you for completing this Calf Academy course. If you have follow-up questions, please contact your Milk Products National Account Manager